Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that the person staring back at you in the mirror is a stranger. Not because your face has changed, but because the eyes, those quiet witnesses of your life, carry a truth you've spent years refusing to see. There's something behind them, a flicker of anger, envy, desire, shame, something you've denied so often that it's learned to hide behind your smile. You look at yourself and sense, for the first time, that you've been living with an uninvited guest. And that guest is you. You've spent your life running from it, through distractions, achievements, relationships, and even kindness. Every compliment, every moment of control, every small victory has been a way to silence a whisper that keeps calling from within. It asks, "Who are you really?" when the masks fall away. But instead of answering, you drown it in noise, scrolling through lives that look better than yours, chasing success that always slips further ahead, pretending that this performance is freedom. Yet somewhere, deep in the hollow quiet of your nights, you know it isn't. You feel it in those moments when the laughter fades, when the room is empty, when your phone is dark, and the silence begins to speak. It tells you that your so-called freedom is a cage built from denial, that beneath your civility lies something unacknowledged, and it's not evil, it's real. The darker emotions, the forbidden thoughts, the impulses you pretend not to have, they are not your enemies. They are the pieces of you that were exiled long ago, waiting to be remembered. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." He understood something most of us don't, that the shadow we fear is not a monster lurking outside us, it is our own reflection, distorted by rejection. Every time you suppress anger, envy, lust, fear, or pain, and you feed that shadow, every time you deny a part of yourself, you make it stronger, more hidden, more dangerous, and so you spend your life chasing purity, virtue, control, while your own darkness quietly governs you from below. But what if you stopped running? What if you turned around and faced the thing you've been avoiding all your life? What would happen if you let yourself see the truth of your own contradictions, the selfishness beneath your kindness, the envy behind your admiration, the cruelty behind your politeness? Would you collapse? Or would you finally be free? Society has taught you to divide yourself. It rewards your light, your discipline, charm, empathy, but it punishes your darkness. From childhood, you were told what parts of you were acceptable and which must be hidden. And so you built a mask, a persona, Jung called it, to survive. You learned to play the role the world wanted, even if it meant abandoning who you truly are. But the cost of that performance is immense. Every mask you wear suffocates a part of your soul. You've mistaken repression for morality, avoidance for peace, denial for strength. You've convinced yourself that facing your darker impulses would destroy you. But it's the refusal that's been slowly killing you all along. You can't heal what you won't confront. You can't be free while you're at war with yourself. Maybe that's why your relationships feel hollow, why your ambitions exhaust you, why your peace never lasts. Because no matter how far you run, the shadow runs faster. It waits for you in every argument, every addiction, every quiet resentment you can't explain. It's the echo behind every judgment you cast on others, for the traits you despise most in them are the same ones you've buried in yourself. So let me ask you, what are you hiding from? What truth terrifies you enough to build an entire life around escaping it? What would happen if you stopped pretending to be good and started being whole? The question is not whether you have a dark side. The question is whether you will ever have the courage to meet it. Because until you do, until you face the stranger within, you will remain a prisoner of your own light. And maybe, just maybe, freedom begins where denial ends. The reason you fear your dark side isn't because it is evil, it's because you were never taught how to hold it. From the first breath you took, you entered a world obsessed with order, image, and virtue. You learned quickly that to be accepted, you had to be good. And so, you trimmed your emotions, softened your truths, and buried your rage beneath politeness. You learned to smile even when you wanted to scream, to forgive even when you wanted to fight. You learned to be everything except real. Carl Jung called this suppression the creation of the shadow self, the unconscious container for everything you reject about yourself. the parts you were told are unlovable, impolite, or wrong. But here lies the paradox. The more you reject the shadow, the more power it gains. What you push away doesn't disappear, it festers. It seeps into your habits, your desires, your relationships. It guides you without your awareness, shaping your destiny in silence. You tell yourself you're calm, but you explode when someone crosses your invisible boundaries. You tell yourself you're compassionate, but secretly you crave superiority. You tell yourself you're strong, but you can't stand being vulnerable. This is the tragedy of repression. It breeds hypocrisy. You become two people, the one you present and the one you hide. Friedrich Nietzsche warned of this very split. He wrote of man's will to power, not as dominance over others, but as mastery over the chaos within. But when society convinces you to deny your chaos, your will to power turns against you. You become enslaved by what you refuse to acknowledge. Every suppressed desire becomes a silent chain. Every unspoken truth becomes a lie that corrodes you from the inside too. This inner division is not new. It is as old as consciousness itself. The ancient myths knew this well. In Greek tragedy, the hero's downfall always came from what he refused to see, his hamartia, his hidden flaw. In religious stories, the devil is not just an external adversary, but the mirror of human denial. Even in psychology, we see the same pattern. The unconscious mind rules the conscious when ignored. Arthur Schopenhauer, long before Jung, believed that human beings are not guided by reason, but by a blind, restless will, a primal drive that demands expression. And when this drive is repressed by moral codes or social norms, it doesn't vanish. It transforms into suffering, anxiety, and despair. The shadow, in essence, is that same primal energy, longing for recognition. Yet modern life only deepens this repression. We live in an age of performance, where identity is curated like an advertisement. You are rewarded not for authenticity, but for consistency, for fitting into an image others approve of. Social media has become the new mirror where you polish your persona daily, terrified that your reflection might reveal something unscripted. But beneath the perfect angles and quotes about positivity, there's a silent exhaustion. The more perfect you try to appear, the more fragmented you become. And so the mind splits itself into layers: the conscious, the performer, and the unconscious, the director. The performer acts confident, moral, and composed, while the director, your shadow, feeds it lines it doesn't even realize it's repeating. Jung called this dynamic projection. You cannot bear to see your own darkness, so you see it in others. You accuse others of what you fear in yourself. You hate the manipulative, arrogant, selfish, or cruel, not because they are unlike you, but because they are you, unmasked. This is why the shadow terrifies people. It destroys moral simplicity. It exposes that even your virtues have selfish motives, even your love can contain control, even your kindness can hide resentment. To face the shadow is to realize that you are not purely good or purely bad. You are both intertwined. Light without darkness is blindness. Nietzsche once said, "Be careful when you fight monsters, lest you become one." What he meant was not a warning against morality, but against denial. When you refuse to confront the monster within, you begin to act it out unconsciously. You become the very thing you condemn. A man who believes he has no darkness is the most dangerous of all, because he cannot see the destruction he causes in the name of righteousness. Our age hides behind the illusion of positivity. We call anger toxicity, sadness negativity, and ambition ego. We drown discomfort in affirmations, pills, and distractions. But Jung would remind us, the goal of life is not happiness, it is wholeness. And wholeness demands the courage to look into the abyss and not turn away. To integrate the shadow is to take responsibility for the parts of yourself you once abandoned. It is to accept that your envy might contain unfulfilled desire, that your anger might hold the truth of injustice, that your lust might express your hunger for intimacy, not sin. To face the dark is not to glorify it, but to understand it, to make it conscious and therefore no longer your master. You were never meant to be spotless. You were meant to be complete. And completeness means contradiction, light and dark, good and bad, saint and sinner, all existing in a fragile, magnificent balance. But few are willing to do this work. Because to face the shadow is to dismantle everything you thought you were. It is to die, symbolically, to your false self. Jung called this the night sea journey, the descent into the unconscious, where the ego dissolves and is reborn. And that descent always begins with terror. The terror of discovering that you are not who you pretended to be. The terror of admitting that the villain you hate in others might live inside you. The terror of realizing that freedom was never about perfection, but about acceptance. So the hidden problem isn't your darkness, it's your refusal to see it. The problem is the lie you tell yourself, that you are only light. Because light without shadow blinds. You might think you've escaped your darkness by silencing it, but silence is not transformation. The shadow you repress doesn't vanish, it adapts. It seeps through your words, your choices, your affections, your fears. It shapes your life so subtly that you begin to mistake its control for your own free will. You become the servant of the very thing you deny. Imagine for a moment that your shadow isn't a monster, but a puppeteer, its strings woven through every part of your being. You chase success, not because you love achievement, but because you fear failure. You show kindness, not because your heart overflows, but because you crave approval. You seek love, not for connection, but for validation. The shadow doesn't destroy you through chaos, it enslaves you through order. It teaches you to act perfect, while quietly ensuring that every action serves its hunger to be acknowledged. And so, you perform. You curate your identity, control your image, refine your tone, craft your morality. But deep down, something feels hollow. Every accomplishment fades faster. Every relationship feels slightly dishonest. Because beneath the surface, there's a dissonance, a constant friction between who you are and who you pretend to be. This dissonance is the psychological cost of repression. Jung warned that what you resist not only persists, but grows stronger. The energy it takes to deny yourself transforms into anxiety, restlessness, and projection. You begin to feel hunted by your own emotions, a sudden flash of rage in traffic, a cruel thought about someone you love, an inexplicable sadness at night. All these are signals from the shadow, knocking on the walls of your consciousness, begging to be seen. You think it's stress, you think it's burnout, you think it's the world, but the truth is simpler and far more unsettling. It's you. The parts of yourself you locked away are trying to come home. Modern society only amplifies this tension. We are surrounded by illusions of freedom, choices, technologies, pleasures. Yet internally, we are more bound than ever. We live in a constant state of self-surveillance, terrified of saying the wrong thing, feeling the wrong thing, being the wrong thing. The culture of optimization has turned the self into a product. You don't live, you manage yourself. You're both the sculptor and the clay, endlessly editing the image you present to the world, never daring to show the cracks. And yet cracks are how the light gets in. But before it heals, denial fractures everything. The unseen consequences of your repression ripple outward. In relationships, you find yourself repeating patterns, falling for the same type of person, playing the same emotional roles, suffering the same disappointments. Why? Because you unconsciously seek mirrors of your shadow. The controlling partner reflects your fear of vulnerability. The distant lover mirrors your repressed independence. The betrayal you experience reveals your own hidden duplicity. The shadow ensures that you meet yourself again and again through others, until you finally recognize the pattern as your own. In society, this mechanism operates on a collective level. Groups, nations, and ideologies all have shadows. When a culture denies its own aggression, it projects it onto an enemy. When a system worships virtue, it breeds hypocrisy. The louder we proclaim our righteousness, the deeper our hidden corruption grows. History repeats this pattern endlessly. The Puritan becomes the oppressor, the revolutionary becomes the tyrant, the preacher becomes the sinner. Why? Because none have faced the darkness within. Jean-Paul Sartre once said that man is condemned to be free. He meant that freedom is not a gift, but a burden. Because to be truly free, you must take full responsibility for yourself, including what you'd rather not see. Most people cannot bear that weight. They trade authentic freedom for comfort, for belonging, for illusion. They accept their chains because the truth would demand transformation. But denial has a cost. When the shadow is ignored, it doesn't just haunt the mind, it shapes the body. Psychosomatic illnesses, chronic tension, unexplained fatigue. These are the physical imprints of emotional repression. The body remembers what the mind refuses to face. Each unspoken truth becomes a knot in the soul. Each buried emotion a slow poison in the bloodstream of your life. And there's another, subtler consequence. Creativity dies. The shadow isn't only the source of your pain, it's also the source of your vitality, your imagination, your passion. When you reject your darkness, you reject your power. The artist who avoids his inner chaos creates lifeless beauty. The leader who denies his fear becomes a tyrant. The lover who hides her anger becomes numb. Repression sterilizes the spirit. You might ask, why does this happen? Why is the mind structured this way, so fragile, so prone to self-deception? The answer lies in evolution itself. The psyche evolved not for truth, but for survival. To belong was safer than to be authentic. To obey was easier than to think. And so, across centuries, we inherited a brain wired to conform, to suppress, to perform. But survival is not the same as living. What kept you safe now keeps you small. Carl Jung called the confrontation with the shadow the most dangerous experience of the psyche, not because it leads to destruction, but because it shatters illusion. When you realize that your morality was partly vanity, your humility partly pride, your love partly possession, your identity begins to dissolve. That dissolution feels like death. And in a way, it is. The death of the false self, the death of who you thought you were. That is why so few people ever awaken. They would rather suffer familiar pain than face unknown freedom. And so the unseen consequence of avoiding your darkness is simple but devastating. You never truly live. You exist in fragments. You build a life around half of yourself. You become addicted to your own light, blinded by it, never noticing that real peace was waiting in the dark all along. Because until you confront your shadow, your life will continue to repeat itself, like a dream you can't escape, the same mistakes, the same fears, the same restless hunger that no achievement can satisfy. Freedom does not begin when you master your shadow. It begins the moment you stop pretending you don't have one. There comes a moment when the silence of denial grows louder than the truth itself. You feel it like pressure in your chest, an invisible weight that no amount of distraction can lift. That moment, the breaking point, is not your failure. It is your awakening. It's the first crack in the prison you've built around yourself. Rebellion begins quietly, not with rage or revolution, but with honesty. The courage to look inward and say, yes, I am capable of cruelty. I am capable of envy. I am capable of everything I judge in others. That admission is not self-condemnation, it's liberation. Because when you can finally name your darkness, it stops controlling you. Carl Jung called this process shadow integration. It's not about erasing the dark, it is about befriending it. To integrate is to bring light to what was hidden, to hold your contradictions without shame. You begin to see that your anger was trying to defend your boundaries, your envy was pointing toward your unfulfilled potential, your pride was protecting your fragile worth. The rebellion is not against your shadow, it's against your fear of it. Facing the shadow is not a single event. It's a descent, a pilgrimage through the inner underworld. You will encounter memories you tried to forget, desires you've been taught to despise, truths that unsettle the foundation of who you thought you were. But in this descent, something miraculous happens. The more you accept, the less you fear. Each dark truth you embrace becomes a torch in your hands, illuminating the depths of your own psyche. The rebellion against illusion is the beginning of self-possession. Look back through history. Every transformation, every revolution, every act of genuine greatness began with someone who refused to conform to their own falseness. The mystics, the philosophers, the artists, they all descended into their shadows. Nietzsche faced madness. Jung wrestled with his unconscious visions. Even Dostoevsky stared into despair to find transcendence. They understood a truth that modern comfort hides. To find yourself, you must risk losing yourself. But how does one begin? Start by observing your reactions. The moments that trigger you, the people you resent, the emotions that make you uncomfortable, they are mirrors. They point to disowned parts of yourself. Instead of rejecting them, investigate. Ask, what part of me feels threatened by this? What truth am I avoiding here? Awareness is the first act of rebellion. Then, let go of moral perfectionism. The need to appear good keeps you enslaved. Goodness born of fear is not virtue, it's obedience. True morality emerges only after you've acknowledged your capacity for evil. Only the man who knows his own darkness can choose light freely. In practical terms, this rebellion might look like setting boundaries instead of pleasing everyone. It might look like expressing anger instead of swallowing it. It might mean saying no even when it disappoints others. It might mean admitting jealousy, guilt, or desire instead of burying them under smiles. The path to integration is not neat. It's raw, uncomfortable, and profoundly human. As Jung wrote, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. Pain is not the enemy. It's the initiation. It burns away the false narratives that kept you small. Through it, you realize that your shadow is not trying to destroy you, it's trying to make you whole. This rebellion also requires solitude. You cannot face the truth surrounded by noise. You must withdraw, even briefly, from the constant stimulation that numbs introspection. In silence, your inner voices grow louder, not to torment you, but to teach you. The thoughts you fear are your lessons. The emotions you resist are your map. But rebellion does not mean isolation from the world. Once you begin to integrate your darkness, your relationships transform. You stop expecting others to carry what you've refused to face. You stop judging them for flaws that mirror your own. You begin to love more honestly, without idealization or fear. Compassion deepens because you see that everyone, like you, is wrestling with their unseen depths. And then, freedom begins to reveal itself, not as euphoria, but as authenticity. The freedom to feel without repression, to speak without disguise, to act without fragmentation. You stop living for appearances and start living from essence. Philosophically, this rebellion is an existential act. Sartre believed that man defines himself through choice, that existence precedes essence. But if your choices are ruled by unconscious forces, you are not choosing, you are reacting. To reclaim your freedom, you must bring the unconscious to light. Jung's work completes Sartre's. True existence begins only when you take responsibility for your unconscious motives. In this rebellion, guilt turns into understanding, shame turns into strength. The energy that once went into hiding becomes creativity, clarity, and power. The shadow, once your saboteur, becomes your ally. But beware, the ego will resist. It will whisper that you are healed too soon, that you have moved past your darkness. It will use spirituality, morality, or intellect as new disguises. The rebellion demands vigilance. You must keep returning to the question, am I being honest with myself right now? To face your dark side is not to conquer it, but to walk beside it, to listen, to learn, to recognize that the same fire that can burn can also illuminate. You cannot amputate half your soul and expect to be whole. So break the illusion. Step into the silence. Meet the stranger within, because the only way out of the darkness is through it. And once you've walked through, the light no longer blinds you. It becomes yours to carry. There comes a point when the struggle ends, not because you've conquered the darkness, but because you've stopped resisting it. You realize that freedom was never about cleansing yourself of the shadow, but about embracing it as your teacher. The final truth is almost unbearable in its simplicity. The monster you feared was never separate from you. It was the part of you that longed most desperately to be loved. Imagine standing once more before the mirror, not as you did before with judgment or disgust, but with understanding. You look into your own eyes and see everything you've hidden. The pain, the rage, the envy, the hunger. And for the first time, you don't turn away. You don't deny it. You simply say, "I see you." That single act dissolves the prison walls. Because what was on, exiled, is now home. This is the paradox of liberation. To become whole, you must first accept that you were never broken. You were divided. The shadow was not your flaw. It was your unintegrated truth. Every emotion you repressed, every impulse you buried, every contradiction you feared, they were fragments of your soul calling out for recognition. Carl Jung believed that the process of individuation, the journey toward the complete self, was the ultimate purpose of human life. Not happiness, not success, not even peace, but wholeness. To bring the unconscious into consciousness, to hold both light and dark without disowning either. This, he said, was how a person became truly free. Freedom, you now understand, is not the absence of darkness, it's the absence of denial. You begin to see that every person you've ever loved or hated was a mirror, reflecting the parts of you that were waiting to return. The cruelty of others taught you to find compassion. The envy you felt showed you where you still longed to grow. Even your deepest wounds were invitations, not punishments, to step closer to your truth. You start to notice something extraordinary. The world itself begins to shift, not because it changes, but because your perception does. The same situations that once triggered you now reveal lessons. The same pain that once broke you now carries meaning. The same fears that once paralyzed you now feel like doorways. This is what Viktor Frankl called the freedom of meaning, the ability to choose your response, to create purpose from suffering. When you face your dark side, you no longer see life as happening to you, but through you. Every shadow that appears is now a signal, not a curse. You no longer ask, "Why is this happening to me?" but "What truth in me is being revealed?" The ultimate realization is both terrifying and transcendent. You are responsible for your inner world. No one else can rescue you. No philosophy, no God, no lover. Because no one else can walk into your shadow. Only you can descend into that underworld and emerge reborn. And when you do, something profound changes. You no longer seek external validation. You no longer crave control. You no longer divide life into good and bad, light and dark. You begin to live in a state of integration, a balance that transcends morality without abandoning it. You understand that the light exists because of the dark, that your flaws are not stains on your soul, but brushstrokes on the masterpiece of your becoming. In this state, forgiveness arises naturally, not as a virtue, but as recognition. You forgive others because you finally understand that they too are haunted by their shadows. You forgive yourself because you realize that every mistake, every failure, every selfish act was simply a cry for consciousness. You were trying, in your own unconscious way, to come home. Philosophically, this is the moment when Nietzsche's challenge, to become who you are, finally makes sense. To become who you are is not to achieve some perfect version of yourself. It is to strip away everything that isn't real until only truth remains. And truth is always paradoxical. You are both divine and flawed, noble and cruel, radiant and broken, and yet perfectly human. And in that realization, peace descends. Not the fragile peace of control, but the quiet peace of acceptance. You no longer need to escape yourself. You no longer need to prove anything. The battle is over. You have met your shadow, and found it was made of light. But this light is not the blinding radiance of denial. It is the soft glow of awareness. It doesn't seek to dominate, it simply illuminates. It reveals that your purpose was never to escape the darkness, but to integrate it, to live as a whole, conscious being. You finally understand that everything you've been searching for, love, purpose, freedom, was hidden in the very places you refused to look. The shadow was never your enemy. It was your guide, leading you back to yourself. And so, you stand now in quiet recognition. The chains that bound you were never made of iron. They were made of ignorance. They fell the moment you looked at your darkness without fear. You walk through the world differently now. You no longer see saints and sinners, winners and losers, light and dark. You see the whole, the great dance of opposites that creates the rhythm of existence. You see yourself in every stranger and every stranger in yourself. You've faced the monster and found that it was human. You've descended into hell and discovered it was home. You've died to the false self and awakened as something far more dangerous, someone who no longer runs from truth. And that is what it means to be free. Because until you face your dark side, you live as its prisoner. But once you embrace it, you realize it was never darkness at all. It was your unclaimed light, waiting for you to return.